masterclass on decoding documentaries by Mr. Raghav Khanna, Managing Director, Riverlane Entertainment. Can I please welcome Mr. Raghav Khanna on the stage?
Hi. Thank you. Thank you. Is the mic working? Am I audible? All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time out and attending this session. Today, I'm going to be talking about documentaries, a genre that has become extremely popular over the last few years. It's always been around. It's not that documentaries have been made only in the last decade or so. But what we've seen is wholehearted and wide acceptance and embracing by the audience, which was not there earlier. Can we have the deck, please? Thank you. Uh, I think it is the collective belief of many great documentary filmmakers that documentaries are made at the intersection of highest order of journalism and finest storytelling. So the truest form of cinema with its narrative abilities and the highest form of journalism, they come together and blend to make a great documentary. So I'm going to talk about the current documentary landscape. They're everywhere, all formats, all shapes and sizes. And like I said, that documentaries have existed for X number of decades, 90 to be precise, more than 90 to be honest. But they were limited to festival runs, limited theatrical release, satellite distribution. In the last decade, we've seen the explosion of documentaries on streaming services. And there has been a dedicated approach, a focus and a vision to which allowed documentaries to take that leap. I'm going to be talking to you about my experiences. For those of you who don't know, I served a stint with Netflix in APAC in Singapore, where I was a part of the commissioning team, and we commissioned documentaries in India, Southeast Asia, Japan, and Korea. For anyone who's making a documentary as a first-time filmmaker, you should be mindful of the formats that you're going to make your documentary in. And I'll tell you why these formats are so important. So there is the short documentary, which is a standalone documentary, either shorter than 40 minutes or shorter than 25 minutes. There are multiple criteria for what defines a short documentary, but shorter than 40 is a safe assumption. Then feature-length documentaries, 70 minutes and upwards gets into the category of feature-length documentary. Then we have the limited documentary series and the returning documentary series. Now I'll tell you why these formats are very important, because when you are a filmmaker, your narrative, your subject can be optimized by the format you go for. I'll give you an example. Suppose you're making a sports documentary. It's a broad categorization of a sports documentary. But you're following one individual, an individual's journey. Most of the time, it'll end up either becoming a feature-length documentary or a short documentary. The bifurcation or that decision should be taken between the producer and the director, largely based on how many story beats are there, for how long can you hold your audience's interest. Always be mindful of that person who's least interested in your documentary but is willing to give you that one chance, because you have to hold their attention. So a lot of filmmakers feel attached to their idea and want to have longer cuts, but sometimes it's counterproductive to have long-running documentaries, whereas you can say the same thing in 40 minutes or shorter. Now, within the sports umbrella, if suppose you're not following one individual and you're following a team, they're all working together in a build-up towards an event, a trophy, etc. It probably lays down the ground for a choice between limited documentary or still a feature, because you have multiple narratives, multiple people to follow. And then, as we've seen across multiple streaming platforms, you can franchise this title, you can build an umbrella theme under which such titles can rest, and they can have seasonality to them. They can return with a different team, they can return with the endeavor of the same team next year. So that becomes the returning series. So from a wide range of spectrum of a 40-minute doc to 4 episodes, then recurring over multiple seasons, that is a choice that the streamer, director, and producer take collectively. It largely is determined by what your narrative is. I meet a lot of documentary filmmakers, independent documentary filmmakers, and somewhere I see this apprehension that when you go to a producer, when you go to a streamer, they'll hijack your vision or they'll derail your vision. And trust me, that's not going to happen most of the times, because in the hands of the right people, they'll only enhance and amplify your creative output. Also, when we decide these formats, a producer looks at it from a very different lens. When you're talking of a short documentary, you're looking at 20, 25 days of filming time. When you're talking of a returnable series, that means 4 episodes and quadrupling that amount of screen time. So you're looking at a much larger production time, and hence your budget gets affected drastically. Now, like I said, that the subject determines the format. Like you follow an individual or a group, or you have an event or an occurrence that you're making a documentary about, a place or an organization, or a theme or a broad subject matter. There are hybrid variations, but largely you would be able to bucket and categorize documentaries within these genres. Now, I'm talking about the tangible building blocks of your documentary. This is like going to a hardware shop, ordering paint and bricks if you were to make a house. Again, why this is important is because it helps you reverse engineer your documentary. With all due respect, a lot of the documentaries are largely following a character in a verite style, which is great. You have intimate access, you're making a documentary about a subject, but you need to have other elements, other treatment tools at your disposal. It's like a mainstream Hindi film without a song and a dance sequence. I mean, it can be made, but it gives it a certain commercial chops. Or an action film which is made without an action director, without an action sequence. So you need to be mindful of these tools which are corresponding to documentaries. The major being interviews, voiceover or voice underlays. They are the narrative heart and soul of a documentary. They can be further subdivided into on-screen interviews, or whether it is just recorded conversations that you're playing out, or whether you're relying on a third-party voiceover. Then archives, the most enriching, the most daunting aspect of documentary filmmaking, because you're reliant on third-party agreements, you're reliant on agencies, news networks, sports bodies, individuals giving you their archive. The flip side of documentaries becoming extremely popular over the last few years is that archive rates across board, whether you're approaching a sports body or a news network, are through the roof, because they feel that you're going to make millions of dollars in making your documentary, which sometimes is the case, but most of the times that's not the case. So right now, getting the right archives for your documentary, especially if your documentary is archive heavy, is a major challenge a filmmaker faces. But thankfully, there are archive producers and archive agencies within India who will help you get over the line. These are people, these are agencies who worked on some of the top titles you would have seen on multiple streaming platforms, and they're the right people you should onboard to use them for getting the right archives to you. Then the next two things are B-roll sequences, which stylizes your documentary, gives it that cinematic aspect, and actualities or verite sequences, which really give the documentary its other soul, that you're able to see people for who they are, you're able to see things for what they are. There's no cosmetic enhancement of what's happening in front of the camera. Then some of the documentaries, now this is selective, may or may not rely on recreations. And again, the scale of your recreations largely is determined by what subject you're making the documentary on, what your budget is, and who your end platform or studio is. We've seen some documentaries that are completely made in that animation and CGI model, and that can be employed selectively or entirely. And again, not exclusive to documentaries, but I cannot overemphasize on the importance of background music and sound design for documentary, especially if you're making something in the true crime space or sports, where the emotions are just coming through sound design and music. Now, in my experience and opinion, I'm going to be talking about mostly what streamers and studios are looking for when they are green-lighting a documentary idea. The first and the most important thing is the narrative and the subject. They are looking for unique stories, novel stories, which really, on the merit of the story, can make them feel assured that, okay, people are going to watch this. So, do you have a unique story to tell? That is the first and the most important thing. Then, the director's perspective, how unique, singular, and cinematic your perspective is. This is something that is hard to contain within words, but in your pitch deck, in your meeting, you should give specific and dedicated focus on how you are treating and seeing that story. Because otherwise, that is the difference between a Wikipedia article and a documentary. Every documentary that you'll see will probably have a Wikipedia page, and the only distinguishing factor is a great director. That makes it cinematic. Then the access. You may have, again, a great subject and a story and a burning desire to tell that story, but do you have access to the people and the places where you want to make documentary on? Because, again, this is third-party reliant, and unlike feature films where you hire actors, you can engage talent, you're sometimes reliant on just people agreeing to give you a window into their life and in their world. And lastly, factual integrity, because again, any subject that you want to see a documentary on, you can Google it on, you can search it on free source, and there is speculative entertainment available. Those are not documentaries. It's hearsay put together in an AV format, but for a serious documentary commissioner, they are looking at the factual integrity of your documentary. It's not to say that you can't have creative liberty, but you cannot wrongly state facts. After all these things, they'll then be looking at the treatment of the building blocks I told you about. How are you treating this? Is your documentary a docudrama? Is it recreation heavy? Is it just interviews and archives? Is it B-roll and sequence heavy? So these are the other aspects that allow commissioners and producers and studios to look at a proposal and decide where it's landing. Then there is obviously a fair amount of weightage given to team credentials, and it's not to deter first-time documentary filmmakers, because when you go to a studio or when you go to a commissioning platform, if they really like your idea, they'll pair you with the right set of people who've done this 4, 5, 10 times before. Because there is a dearth of talent who's making documentaries which have commercial viability. And only if that ecosystem grows can we see the industry flourish at large. Yes, there will be individual examples of brilliance every now and then. We will conquer the biggest awards across the world. But for India to say that we are a thriving documentary ecosystem, there needs to be a pool of directors, producers, and commissioners who are constantly engaging with each other, and there are a certain number of titles coming out every month, every week. After all these checks and balances, any platform or studio will look at the budget that you've proposed for your documentary and will look at the scale and scope. Budget, of course, I don't need to explain what it means, but sometimes the same idea at the right price is 2 times more enticing. And scale and scope, there are multiple internal metrics that most of the platforms go by, and they have data and intel available that whether a certain subject, whether a certain topic will generate interest or not. Legal framework is so unique to documentary filmmaking. Legal processes exist across other storytelling formats as well. But I think, at least in my opinion and experience, within documentary filmmaking, legal framework is perhaps the next most important thing just outside your story and your narrative. For you to make a documentary film, you firstly should contact the right producer if you're not producing yourself. And then you should onboard the right legal team. Again, like archive producers, archive experts, there are lawyers, legal firms out there who've made a handful of documentaries and now understand what the journey requires. What a lawyer will help you achieve is that you'll need access and agreements, and they are not handshake or verbal agreements. You need to pen it on paper before you start rolling. Whoever your subject is, wherever you're filming that documentary, they need to sign a release form. Because one thing is for sure, the moment you go to a streamer saying that I'm making a documentary on XYZ musician, XYZ actor, they'd want to see a signed piece of paper. Then permits and clearances. Every time you think of either using a handheld camera or putting down your tripod and start rolling, there are multiple permits that come into play. You need the permission of the person you're featuring, either directly or it's an incidental feature. You need the permission of the place you're shooting at, whether it's a private or a public location. And then you need further permits that if there is any branding, etc., not in the frame. For a first-time filmmaker, these may be nasty discoveries down the line when you've already filmed most of your documentary. But with the right legal advice and onboarding and with the right producer on board, these are things you can always build bridges towards before you're going out to shoot. Then insurance guidance. Insurance again works very differently for documentaries because you're not only insuring against weather and your project against an unfortunate hard drive crash or actor not showing up. You're insuring against errors and omissions. You're insuring against defamation and third-party claims. So you need to be properly insured when you're making a documentary, especially if your subject is sensitive and if your documentary is sensitive. Then documentary, because it is not, it is an original creation, but until you create it, unless you've exported your master and it's played somewhere, you're still reliant on publicly available information, privileged information, or people's personal opinion. So whether you're infringing on somebody's IP or copyright, that's something that a lawyer will help you. And these could be very candid discussions. When ahead of an interview, you can just email and call your lawyer saying, I'm interviewing XYZ person. These are the questions I'm asking. Do you think I'm on board? Because they'll view it from the lens of whether the person can come and defame you later or whether they are releasing any information that may be copyright protected. While you're editing, you may think it's completely all right to use a commercial that your music star featured in, but then that commercial probably belongs to an agency or the brand. So you need to get their NOC as well. Then there are multiple ongoing instances of guidance and advice that your legal counsel will provide you in a documentary making journey, because it's not something that you're making over 6-8 months. For any kind of documentary, it'll at least take a year out of life, sometimes 3, and you have to commit yourself wholeheartedly to that. And again, as an extension of what I mentioned about infringement and defamation, lawyers protect your interests. They protect you. They'll be able to guide you in ways which you're not perceiving. Then securing releases, because when you're making a documentary film, you also have to be mindful of how and where you're releasing it. We've read about or seen multiple instances in the past where individuals or organizations have taken stay order against release. Now, when you've made your documentary, it's set for release, your lawyer can anticipate where these stay orders may come from and can have counter injunctions in place so that your release is safeguarded. And then, like we say in Hindi, Hati ki poonch, there is that whole set of legal deliverables that continue for months after your release, which your lawyer, unless they've prepared from the time you started shooting, will struggle to make ends meet, because suddenly you realize that I shot an interview 2 years ago and I'm keeping that interview in my documentary. I can't do without it, but I don't know where that person is. I don't even have their phone number or email address. And you don't want to be in that situation, because the end user, the end platform will not accept your documentary without it, and probably your last payment is tied to the successful delivery of these legal documents. Now, documentary is not made with 70, 80, 100 crew members. You should be in single digits, you should be under 15, and if you're doing something where you need more than 15 people, either you're doing a once in a project kind of a situation, or you're doing something wrong. There can't be any other thing. Again, after the director, the second most important person, your producer. The way a producer shepherds a documentary is so important. And if you're a first-time filmmaker, don't bring it upon yourself to produce and direct it at the same time. Give your 100% to directing that documentary and let a producer worry about all other things. Legal, permits, budgeting, distribution. There are specialists who are doing it. Let them do that job. They'll be your creative ally in this journey. They'll only help you enhance your creative vision and hopefully make it commercially viable where you've made a documentary, it's done a festival run, and it can find light of day with a platform for a commercial release. Then documentary specialists, because right from your cinematographer to your editor, when you're pairing with these team members, you have to see how well they are with the documentary genre. There may be a great cinematographer who's only shot advertisements and feature films, and they've worked with a light truck, they've worked with 7 assistants, they take 45 minutes to set up a shot. That's great. When they do that ad, when they make that feature film, it works, and there are very few people who can do that job. But when you're looking for a cinematographer shooting your documentaries, you need somebody with the skill set of a street photographer, where they are able to see life unfold and capture it cinematically. Yet at the same time, when they're doing your setups, recreations, and interviews, they should have the know-how or the knowledge to again use an entire cinematographer's arsenal and set it up cinematically. And same with the editors, because editing is so important to documentary filmmaking. You're following a script, but you may be discarding that script on the 3rd day. Most of the times your footage is shot, and if you follow the script, yes, you can come out safely, you can make, thank you so much. Yeah, if you're following can you hear me? Yeah. If you're following a script on the edit table, yes, it's a safe way out. You can cut according to what you'd planned. But most documentary editors, producers, directors realize that the beauty of this genre is that there are endless possibilities to what you can do with the material. And that's where your editor, your story consultants, and your producers become your strongest ally, because they're not taking the story from A to B to C. They're probably starting at D, going to Z, touching an N and a P in the middle, and it still makes sense, probably in a better manner than what you'd originally set out to do. Then, to make the project commercially contained, a good producer, what they'll do is they'll analyze at what stage do you need what kind of a resource. Projects go overboard when you realize that the people you hired who had heavy lift work during pre-production are still there during post-production. Or the people you need for post were employed way ahead when half of your film was not shot. So when you have selective and timely engagement of talent, it allows you to allocate resources towards giving the filmmaker more shooting days, to employing the musician of your musician of your choice, to working with the best talent. Because it's hard to explain how this producer's mind work, but they're always qualitatively allotting resources, rather than just making the project top heavy and realizing that you've run out of funds midway. And then the agents and distributors, because even with a good producer, at the end of the journey, you need agents and distributors to fully maximize the potential of where all your documentary can reach across the world. And trust me, right from a flight to some of the countries that don't even speak English, Hindi, or any other language, you'll probably not be able to place them on the map. A good agent and distributor will be able to sell your documentary in that territory. Now, how do you budget and fund a doc? The most preferred outlet would be an original commission, where a platform buys into your idea, looks at your sizzle, and says, okay, we are on board, let's make it. It allows you the luxury of working with people who are doing multiple projects at the same time, who are great at their job, and you'll be able to leverage right from the creative brains of the creative team to the legal team at a platform, to their production support, financing support. Your life will become so much more easier if a platform upfront commissions your idea. And I think I recommend all filmmakers, and as a producer, that's my personal preferred route as well, if you get an original commission. The second is you're partnering with a studio where they are hanging their hat on an idea, they are putting their money behind your creative vision, providing maybe half or three-fourths of the support a platform will provide you, and then collectively you sell it to the end user. The other option is loans or private equity. This is something a lot of independent filmmakers go towards, and it's a great option because studio partnership and private equity, at least in the more mature documentary markets, has been responsible for gems coming out. Only when a platform looks at commissioning any documentary or possibly any genre, they are also mitigating their risk. They are taking the sure shot bets. But what is novel, what probably will create new viewing patterns, will bring about a paradigm shift, that kind of risk taking a good studio, a producer, or people who can bring in private equity will allow. And we need that because 2-3 new ideas come, they set a pattern, that pattern becomes the safe bet, gets followed for 2-3 years, but it's cyclical. You need to break it. And the only way to break it is by taking bold bets. And then crowdfunding and grants, again, great starting point. It has its own merits, but I don't need to tell you that it could probably cause a lot of seams in your journey where you're stopping a production because you've run out of funds and then you need to start again. Not an ideal scenario to be in. Then moving on, how do you distribute a documentary? So like I said, that original commission is the first and the most preferred way to do it. Original commission does not only happen at an idea stage. You could do it at any stage of the project before you've released it. There are multiple instances of platforms seeing a finished product and say we want to acquire it as an original, which means that they get exclusivity over all copyright and exploitation rights to that title. If you're ever offered that deal, please take it, because the eyes that you're going to get on your documentary will far supersede anything else. The other option is the same platforms and networks will acquire your content, host it on their service, but not as original. So it will rest with them on their service, but it will not be an original. And you probably will be able to negotiate your ability to distribute this title elsewhere as well. Then festival and limited theatrical run is another outlet to distribute a documentary. Festivals, yes, bring prestige to a project and which is greatly appreciated, and limited theatrical runs also allow you to, one, qualify for certain prestigious film festivals, but also hopefully they'll be able to generate a viable financial stream for you. Then worldwide satellite and streaming licenses. If you have not gone in for an original commission, the right distributor will be able to get you satellite and streaming license deals across the world. They may not be very good looking when you're looking at the check, but think of the number of territories which are there in the world, and multiple producers are defining territories differently. There's EMEA, which is Europe and Middle East. There's UCAN, Canada and United States. There's Latin America, Russia, China, Australia, Southeast Asia. These are all separate territories. And you have to look at the collective finances that these territories can bring you. They'll not only be able to help you to recover your investment, but hopefully you'll be able to see some gains as well. And the last option here is pay-per-view model, or you can just put your documentary on YouTube for people to watch, but you're hoping for millions of views before you even start generating any revenue in this model. And again, with the right producer and distributor, this will be one of the first criteria that they'll judge your project after they've been assured that, okay, there's a good story to tell and you're the right person to tell it. That was all from my side. I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Hi. Can you share, like you were saying about how a project can start, whether it's commissioned or whatever. So to take an example, if you could take the example of the Elephant Whisperer, how did that happen? Did it come to you already as something that was produced and it was pitched to you, or was it at the inception stage? I mean, how did that happen? If you just take that as an example.
So I was a part of the Elephant Whisperers, and Kartiki had reached out to me and my team with material that she had been shooting for months. When we saw that footage, one thing that came to all of us collectively is that there is a magical relation between a beast and human, and you can't take your eyes off it. And then when we had a series of meetings with Kartiki, we realized that here's a filmmaker who's not only passionate about the subject, but she's also an expert at it. It was her first documentary film, but she has worked in the wildlife space and she has been a wildlife photographer for many years before that. And as a producer and a commissioner, that's one of the most comforting factors, that your director, your storyteller knows the subject. Sometimes it happens that the filmmaker is embarking on a journey of curiosity and they're also discovering the subject in the journey of the filmmaking. But you miss the serious questions then, because for you then everything is exciting, everything is new. With Kartiki, that was not the case. She was already seeing the potential and the vision for this series. Once we saw this material, we realized that for us as Netflix, for us to make it at a scale which could be embraced by the audience, we need to bring in the right producer. And that's the point in time I reached out to Guneet, that Guneet, I have a very good filmmaker with a beautiful subject. Meet each other, see if there is a collaboration at play. And thankfully, the producers liked the subject and Kartiki as much as we did. And then it was a collective effort between a streamer, a producer, and the filmmaker, a 2.5-year journey that we were all together on to make this film. Yes, Naman.
So I understand that the global funding pool for documentaries, especially amongst streamers and networks, is diminishing. So why is that, and what's the way around it for upcoming filmmakers?
That is a very good question, and honestly, I don't have a definite answer because it baffles me. The amount of success, the kind of success documentaries have seen over the last 5 to 7 years should only increase the amount of commissions that come in right now. One of the reasons why you'll not see documentaries being commissioned readily is the lack of talented and proven filmmakers, unfortunately. And it's a chicken and an egg situation, because unless you give them that chance, how will they make that first documentary? So that's where I feel that if you're a studio or a producer and you're making a documentary and you can lean in and expose yourself to that risk, that what I make will be good, you're mitigating the risk on the other end, where the chances of acquiring a good documentary are very high. They are high right now and they'll continue to remain very high, because it's not a big amount of investment from a from a streamer's perspective, and they're not betting on something which is speculative. They are seeing it flesh, blood, meat and bones for what it looks like, what it sounds like. And I think that's where they'll be able to acquire more documentaries rather than commission original documentaries. Original documentaries are still being commissioned, but I think streamers are going back to filmmakers who've delivered success for them. I hope I was able to answer your question.
Raghav, I have a question.
Yes.
So, I'm sure you've noticed, and I'm sure all of you in this room have noticed, we really are making a very big push towards documentaries, supporting documentaries, including documentaries in our curation. At Film Bazaar alone this year, we have 12 documentary projects in co-production. We have 5 in work in progress, which we've never had before. I've selected 4 documentary films in Film Bazaar Recommends. So we really are making a concerted effort to put Indian documentaries on the worldwide map. My question to you is, given the success of Indian documentaries across the world in the last 5 years, why is it that there is not that kind of audience in India that is appreciating this kind of work when international audiences are appreciating it so much more? Have you thought about this? Because it baffles me as well.
No, this is a question that we've come to at least answer in a limited capacity, because when you look at 10 years ago, worldwide scenario of documentary filmmaking, even in the US, even in mature markets like UK and US, they were not mainstream. Yes, there were prestigious awards which have existed, the Academy Award, BAFTA, and all other awards that we all aspire for. But the large mainstream success of documentaries have come in the last 5 to 10 years. And why that has happened is because 2, 3 streamers had dedicated documentary units, and they were given a free hand to making the best version of those documentaries. Subjects are still the same. The execution can't be compromised, especially in this day and age. I think personally for me, The Last Dance was a game changer, because the way they told a sports story, even if you don't follow basketball, even if you're not aware who Michael Jordan is, you can dedicatedly watch that 6-part series. And then there are multiple examples like that. True crime exploded in an unprecedented manner. But why it happened? Because their production quality, right from the texture of the frame, to the sound design, to the music, to the way the story is put together, is so elevated. And I think as an indie documentary filmmaker, you have to embrace that your craft can't be compromised. If your craft is at the level where it can compete with the most popular and successful documentaries out there, then you stand a fair chance. Then the question is not whether it is mainstream or not. The question is whether I want to commission this subject right now or not.
My question is, many fiction writers, they write fiction that something happened to their lives, and it becomes universal also their subject. Can documentary writer and maker also come out of this genre? Something happened to them and they want to document it, and it can become universal?
There are pieces, timeless pieces of art which already exist in this genre, where a filmmaker has catalogued their personal journey. For Sama, the one I refer to here, is also an example where you must watch that film. I'm not going to give you spoilers, but it is the journey of filmmakers. So yes, filmmakers often make the subject personal. Sometimes they are documenting their own life. The Octopus Teacher also, like, largely self-shot, self-narrated. So filmmakers are taking their life as an inspiration and following it as well.
Thank you.
I wanted to say that it was a really insightful presentation, but when a producer is pitching to get a documentary commission, what do you mean by the treatment note in it?
See, a treatment is a breakdown of your creative vision. Your creative vision is just that this is the story I want to tell and why I want to tell it. It's the how that your treatment is. Very simply, it's how you will tell that story. That is the treatment. I'm going to follow this character for 3 days. I'm going to shoot dedicatedly with them for today. I'm going to follow them for 2 years. That is your treatment. I'm going to rely heavily on CGI and animation or on recreations. So that's the treatment, and every director has a signature, even if they are doing the same thing. For instance, there may be 2 different directors doing recreations for the same documentary. They'll turn out very differently. Yes.
I'm a documentary filmmaker. I have made more than 400. I have been working for documentary movement in Burma. I have been facing one thing from day one, that documentary filmmaker has a problem of funding, and another to reaching people in search of money, in search of audience. Nobody, now things have changed after the technology has come in, and there are new upcoming young filmmakers have come and they have been doing. But what is happening about reaching people? Now only one thing, one film has come, Elephant Whisperers. that got the publicity and everything has seen. But how many filmmakers, because young filmmakers, naturally they are with the enthusiasm they do, but there is no support of distribution. What you have said is thing, but how to reach, where to go? Because there are so many people coming, अरे हमको दे दो, हम आपका दिला देंगे and all this, but it never happens, and that is why new filmmakers are not getting into documentary movement.
That's a very valid question, sir. And firstly, it's commendable that you've stayed committed to the art for so long. So I have huge admiration for somebody doing that. I think how a documentary gets distributed, a good producer will be able to break down, because when they're listening to a concept, they are at the same time decoding that, okay, this will probably have a great festival run. It potentially can reach to the top 4 or 5 film festivals. Or this is a subject that will create something that is going to be engaging, binge-worthy and entertaining viewing. So they'll then pivot it towards something that they are creating for streaming. Unfortunately, yes, theatrical exhibition of documentaries in this part of the world, not only in India, is very difficult to find. But that should not become the end goal, because things have drastically improved from where they were 5 years ago. Like, you only had festivals and a couple of TV networks. But now you have streamers, you have TV networks, and you have your festival run as well. Like I mentioned earlier, that this may not be the best time to take an idea and find commissioning, but if you're able to make a documentary with a producer, a studio, or private equity, your chances of getting an acquisition are significantly higher than they were ever.
But now, reaching to audience is a big problem. Earlier, it was Films Division, which was releasing in every theater was watching documentaries before it was. 1956 onwards, it started. But that system has gone now. Now no theater wala is ready to screen documentaries. There is no system. Please guide us where to. I have guided 100 youngsters with so many other individuals. They say, I will do it, I will do it. And then afterwards, they use that footage or that idea in their personal use. And so many young children have got this bad experience of making documentary films. And after that, they are disheartened. Documentary is a 4-letter word, ultimately.
That is an unfortunate and an unsavory experience. But if you're reaching out to the right people, a studio, a streamer, or a producer, they'll either politely decline that they can't be a part of this project for XYZ reason, but if they get behind it, they'll ensure that it has the maximum chance of success and reaching the audience. You look at not only The Elephant Whisperers, yes, that won an award, but you look at House of Secrets, you look at Hunt for Veerappan. These all have given mainstream fiction films and series a run for their money in terms of how the audiences have embraced them. They've all had binge-worthy numbers off the charts. So that is encouraging, and again, it baffles me why there are no original commissions right now when there is proven success.
Hi, Raghav. I just wanted to understand when you're using successful documentaries, like for me, The Last Dance was pretty much a global a hit because you had Michael Jordan. Through Michael Jordan's access, we had all the back end. Otherwise, for an indie documentary filmmaker, having access to Michael Jordan would take a lifetime. And again, coming back to the main question, the root cause is we want to create great documentaries, but if we don't have the backups of the big politicians or the governments or whoever the plot is based on, then there is no point of making the documentary. Even though as a filmmaker, and I'm not a documentary filmmaker, but I like telling good documentary stories that need to be heard, that have an agenda or have an issue that needs to be addressed. Quite recently, we did the India-Australia chapter on cricket, eliminating boundaries through cricket after the first lockdown. But we did have certain political issues because some parts of the government were not covered, but the part of the government that supported India and Australia, in Australia after the lockdown, that was a big story. But unfortunately, we are just cup hung. We've got a lot of footage, we've got great angles, but we're not able to put it out there because of political agendas. How do you tackle that in a legal format?
So I think that's where the emphasis on working with a good legal team who are experts at documentary storytelling, providing legal guidance to documentary filmmakers is critical, and also producers who've made documentaries, because even if they've not encountered this directly, they will be able to anticipate it from their previous experience. And when you're dealing with situations where there are government bodies or sports bodies involved, their survival is not dependent on your documentary, yours is. So you have to find a diplomatic and a legally right way to still make it. It's not to say make editorial compromises, but at some point you come to a crossroad where you take the advice offered to you by your producer and your lawyer, or you're making something that will not see light of the day. The other question that you'd asked at the start is that why are independent filmmakers not being able to make films like Last Dance? I think over there it functions like feature films. When you make an indie film which wins an award, then you make a mid-budget film, only then will you get a film at 200 crore to make it. So for you to aspire to make a documentary with Michael Jordan equivalent, you need to have at least 2-3 films that you've made as a director, as a producer, which have won awards, which have been successful on TV or on streaming, and you've built a name and reputation for yourself. Then your access to the talent is also easier.
Hey Raghav, so you did talk about what streamers, commissioners are looking for, but could you also outline for the group what they're absolutely not looking for, the red flags when a project comes to?
I'll have to rely on my personal instincts here, because metrics are constantly evolving. What I'm telling you right now will certainly change in 3 weeks' time. So streamers are definitely looking for a great story to tell and a very clear perspective from which it's told. This for me is half the journey. Then the building blocks I told you about, that how are you treating your documentary? This is what separates an indie documentary from something which is mainstream. The same subject can be made commercially viable when it has those checks and balances in place, where its treatment is thought through, where you have a creative roadmap ahead of you. And right now, yes, if you take a script or a deck, it's hard to get somebody's attention, but commit yourself, lean into that risk of filming something and showing them what it is for. Because at least for the Elephant Whisperers, that's what worked. Nobody's expecting you to shoot something which is properly graded, is on top cameras. It could be from your phone. Your skill as a filmmaker and how the subject will appear on camera will distill for your commissioner. Yeah.
Just wanted to ask you from where the documentary begins and to where the documentary actually gets seen, back from the ground to back to the ground, from the word to where it's. So from where it begins in terms of where it's shot in the real cinema space to where it's actually seen, where those protagonists are and the people are around. Do you think the industry today is open to collaborating in the distribution and screening space with groups, a lot of us who have been doing physical screenings with audiences? Because I know that the power of that conversation gives back to the filmmakers as it gives to the audience. I've been doing this for 23 years, but I feel that we're going into that digital space, and a lot of the physical space efforts, which the filmmakers are also keen on and audiences, need support. And to add to that, when we are actually then also making these into hybrid versions, a lot of people are actually watching the films on WhatsApp. Communities are watching because we are being able to provide that access. But is there a scope today for that collaboration between streamers, producers, filmmakers, platforms, and on-ground spaces?
I think that is largely a distribution, business and marketing decision, because increasingly what you see with TV networks and streamers is when they acquire a title, they're taking all rights. So even the filmmaker or the producer has very little say on how it gets distributed. However, if you are still in control of your distribution, you can choose to have select screenings, and there are innovative ways to do it. There are open air theaters in multiple cities right now. You can have a traveling exhibition show for your documentary. But it needs to tie back to a marketing strategy, because otherwise what's the point? When you have a screening publicly, you will be talking to the audience, you will create a word about it, but you have to be mindful that it will lead to technical disqualification for your documentary to go to many awards because you've exhibited it somewhere. It may or may not entice a streamer to buy it because, again, you've exposed it elsewhere before you showed it to them. So I think that's where the right producer, and this is all case dependent, but the right producer will be able to create that strategy bespoke for a particular documentary.
Yeah, okay. I have more of a reaction actually to what he said. This has been a problem. There was an old-time solution, like he mentioned, that it was made mandatory by government to screen. That has exactly proved to be a counterproductive, because I've lived through that era. And when people came in late for the film, they say, oh, documentary is on. They were also shown with all lights on. So it was time, those days smoking in the lobby was allowed. So people would go out, smoke, have something. The reasons were that the documentaries were like files or brochures of the government. Publicity, these things were entirely monopolized. So that has had this counter effect, and we have not yet come out of that. The second question, which has always bothered me, also I think he said something similar to that, is that in America, Michael Moore made that, I think he crossed the line when actually his film became a commercial success in the halls. So maybe I'm hopeful someday we will have something, because right now it's to a limited audience, because let's face it, OTT and other things, you know, and the people who have an access, and in a smaller circuit we met the dent. On the industry also, I think that one can see that deflected this thing, because all these biographical and other films, now 83 Cup and this and that, one can, I think it's an acknowledgement, you know, of the fact that the fact-based films or documentaries, you know, is kind of evolving as a genre. But they, not being documentary experts, people are doing it in the fiction format. So where would that movement come from? I mean, I know that nobody will have a definite answer. Maybe some serendipity, or maybe there's something that, you know, one will have to think in terms, all of us, not only networks, in terms of getting a fair and large distribution, you know, on a smaller scale, because then and then only it will have a visibility. That's a question that I think, I'm sure it bothers not only me, but others also.
It does, and we're going to have to address that outside, if you don't mind, because we're just completely out of time and the next panel is starting. Raghav, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You know, ever since I've met this man, he's been a champion of just the work we're doing here. Raghav, I could not have picked some of these documentaries without you and your help and your guidance. So thank you for being a champion of our work, and we are definitely a champion of yours.
Thank you, Jitin, and thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone.
Guys, the next panel is going to start immediately. So if you're staying for the next panel, please stay on. Otherwise, we're going to start immediately.